I wasn't supposed to laugh. I was supposed to be angry, maybe confused. But instead, I just lay there in my bed, sunlight creeping through the gauzy curtains, and I laughed, soft, bitter, almost hysterical. Because the universe had handed me a second chance. And this time, I was not going to waste it on a man who watched me die while planning a wedding with someone else. In my past life, I was devoted, pathetically so, to Cale Donovan. I gave him everything. My youth, my loyalty, my dreams. I rearranged my entire life to make space for his ambitions. But when illness consumed me and I was left bedridden and skeletal, Cale didn't even wait for the last breath to leave my body. He was already booking the grand hall for a wedding with Melina Hart. Their wedding and my funeral happened on the same damn day. Romantic, huh? But not this time. While Cale was scrambling to cut ties with my family to avoid the engagement and rushing to Melina's side like some twisted white knight, I did something bolder. I walked into the Donovan estate. You marrying into the Donovans was your grandfather's dying wish, Mr. Donovan, the family patriarch, told me, producing a yellowing contract between our families. This was decided years ago. I glanced at the paper with detached amusement before looking up. My eyes drifted past the stiff old man to the tall figure behind him. If I have to marry someone in this family in 2 weeks, then I choose him, I said, pointing straight at the man standing in the shadows, Lord Donovan. The room froze. Mr. Donovan's teacup paused halfway to his lips. Vera, he said slowly, like he wasn't sure if he'd heard me right. Marriage isn't a joke. You and Cale have known each other since you were born. Everyone expected what? I cut in. That I'd marry a man who never wanted me. Who made it clear from our wedding night that I'd never earn his affection. In my last life, Cale married me reluctantly, under pressure. His wedding vow, if you could call it that, was, since you insisted on this farce, don't expect love from me. And I, foolish romantic that I was, believed time would change him. I believed my loyalty and care would melt his heart. They didn't. Even when we were 60, Cale still kept Melina's letters in a box like sacred scripture. I remember seeing him cry over them while pretending I didn't notice. I had lived with that indifference, swallowed his neglect like medicine, until the very end. And still, all I got was hate in return. I would have divorced you long ago if it weren't for the promise I made to my grandfather, he told me days before I died. You ruined my life. You ruined us. There was never an us. So no, I wasn't going to repeat that mistake. I'm not joking, I told Mr. Donovan calmly. The agreement only said I was to marry into the Donovan family. It never specified Cale, did it? Lord Donovan. The man I chose. He was the youngest son, born when Mr. Donovan was in his 50s. Quiet. Distant. Almost forgotten by the society that constantly celebrated his flamboyant older brother. In my past life, Lure had left the country after his father's death and never married. My memory of him was vague, but I remembered this: he always carried himself with calm integrity, a rare thing in this family. If I had to tie my life to someone, at least let it be someone who knew how to respect. Mr. Donovan sighed, rubbing his temple as if this whole situation had aged him 10 years in 5 minutes. Fine. But Lure has to agree. I held my breath. Lure stepped forward. His pale blue shirt was perfectly pressed, every button aligned like he lived in a world that demanded precision. If you're sure about this, he said, voice even, eyes unreadable, then I have no objection. And just like that, the date was set. In 2 weeks, I would marry a man I barely knew, but at least he wouldn't spit on my soul. Cale barged in halfway through the meeting, all righteous fury and drama. You can't do this, he shouted at his grandfather. Childhood engagements are ridiculous traditions. I'm marrying Melina. If you don't allow it, I'm cutting ties. Mr. Donovan exploded. That woman had a child out of wedlock. You embarrassed our family. Cale didn't care. He stormed out after delivering one final venomous insult to me. You think this will change anything, Vera? I'm never marrying you. I didn't even blink. He thought I was there to force him into marriage. Ha! He had no idea I'd already freed us both. Word spread fast. I could hear the whispers at the university where we worked. My colleagues thought I'd lost it. One even leaned in during lunch and whispered, "Vera, you're just letting Cale go like that?" I shrugged. He was never mine to begin with. Not long after, I went to pack up my things from the apartment Cale and I were supposed to live in, provided by his family. But when I arrived, I found my boxes thrown out in the hallway like I was some ex-roommate. Melina stood in the doorway, arms folded, a floral dress clinging to her like she was already the lady of the house. "Sorry, Vera," she said sweetly. "Cale asked me to move in. There's just not enough space, you know." I didn't say a word. I bent down and started gathering my things. "You're not even going to fight?" she asked. I looked up and smiled, cold and sharp. A thief and a mutt, how romantic. A perfect pair. Her face turned crimson. "Who are you calling a?" Cale appeared just then, saw the scene, and jumped to defend her like some teenage fool. "Why are you bullying her? All she did was ask you to leave. Are you really so obsessed with the Donovan name?" I didn't even flinch. You know when pain stops hurting? When it becomes so familiar, so repetitive, that it dulls into numbness? I left. Quietly. I didn't cry this time. But I did smile, because that life, the one where I was invisible and unwanted, was no longer mine. I moved into the faculty dorms the next day, a cramped but clean little room with a creaky bed and a view of the school's dusty courtyard. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine, and for the first time in both my lives, I felt like I could finally breathe. The air was different when you weren't waiting on crumbs of affection. I began to eat better, sleep better, think clearer. And though I still passed Cale and Melina in the halls sometimes, arm in arm like two overgrown teenagers playing pretend, I never stopped walking. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. But I did keep my head high enough for them to see I was no longer standing beneath them. Rumors moved through the staff like wildfire. One of the older teachers whispered to me during lunch, "You know, Vera, it's really something how Cale and that girl act like she already owns him. The students even call her Mrs. Donovan now." I offered only a small smile, stirred my tea, and said, "Let them play house. Fairy tales don't last forever." But even then, a small voice in the back of my mind warned me, they wouldn't stop with just the apartment or gossip. They needed more to secure their positions, their pride, their delusions. And I was right. A week later, the principal called me in, looking oddly solemn, like he'd aged 10 years overnight. He slid a thin folder across the desk and said, "Ms. Hartwell, I'm sorry, but someone's reported you for plagiarism. Your article from the district-wide teaching competition, there's an accusation it wasn't your original work." I blinked, stunned. My chest tightened. "That's impossible," I whispered. "I wrote every word." He rubbed his brow and let out a weary sigh. "They've submitted drafts, outlines, convincing enough to launch a formal investigation. I suggest you take a few days off while the higher-ups look into it." The air left my lungs. As I stood to leave, nausea swirled in my stomach. And then, like clockwork, I saw her. Melina, standing just around the corner, lips curled into a smirk so smug I could have mistaken her for a queen. My breath caught in my throat. There was no one else who could have accessed my drafts, those were stored in the apartment, the one I was thrown out of. The one she moved into. I stepped forward slowly, trembling not with fear, but fury. "It was you," I said, my voice low. "You stole my work." She didn't deny it. Didn't even blink. "So what if I did?" she replied, her tone like syrup. "You were careless. You left your things lying around like you didn't want them." Then she leaned closer, whispering like we were conspirators instead of enemies. "You took Cale. Don't expect me to let you keep your career too." I stood there, seething, fists clenched, knuckles white. I wanted to scream, throw something, but instead I did what I always did, I gathered the fragments of myself and walked away. Quiet, poised, patient. But I wasn't going to let this end like before. Not this time. I filed an appeal, of course. Marched into the district office with every bit of documentation I had. But their faces were already set, their minds made up. "There's substantial proof your work matches another submission," one official told me. "You'll be informed of the final decision within the week." The decision came fast. I was fired. Quietly. No public meeting, no dramatic confrontation, just a short note of dismissal and a few sympathetic glances from coworkers too afraid to speak up. I walked out of that school with my head still high and my steps still steady, though inside I was a wildfire. And then, because irony loves cruelty, Cale held a party. A small one at a local restaurant to celebrate Melina's sudden promotion to full-time faculty. I wasn't invited, of course, but I showed up anyway. I walked through the crowd in silence, picked up a glass of deep red wine, and without a word, poured it slowly over Melina's head. The gasps came all at once. She shrieked and stumbled, eyes wide, dripping. Cale lunged toward me and dragged me out, nearly bruising my arm in the process. "Are you insane?" he roared once we were alone. "It's just a teaching job. Do you know how hard Melina's life has been? She's a single mother, can't you let her have something?" That's when it hit me like a gut punch. He knew. He knew, he'd been part of it. Maybe even helped her forge the drafts. And all along, he'd been playing the savior. The gall of it made my vision blur. I slapped him. Hard. My palm stung, but it was the most satisfying pain I'd ever felt. "Cale Donovan," I hissed, "you make me sick. I wouldn't marry you if the world were ending." His eyes flared with disbelief, like he couldn't fathom the idea that I might mean it. Because in his deluded little mind, I was still that girl hopelessly in love, the one who begged and waited. But I was no longer her. 3 days later, he showed up at my new apartment, dressed too neatly, eyes too soft, carrying the weight of a pathetic apology. "Vera," he said, "I'm sorry. Melina made a mistake." She panicked, she acted on impulse, I cut him off with a laugh so sharp it almost echoed. "You're here to apologize for her?" He looked uncomfortable, shifting on his feet. "She's under investigation now," he said. "But if you tell the board you gave her permission to use the drafts, she might be able to stay." He meant it. This man, the one who betrayed me, humiliated me, stood by while I was ruined, he wanted me to rescue her. I didn't even reply. I just closed the door in his face. My wedding to Lure was now only a few days away, and while my heart was still guarded, I was beginning to sense something safe in him. Something reliable. I needed stability. I needed kindness. I needed someone who didn't treat love like a bargaining chip. But Cale wasn't done. The night before the wedding, my friend Serena dragged me out for a quiet celebration, a little bachelorette dinner with a few close friends. "Foreigners throw wild parties," she joked. "Let me give you a civilized version." I agreed, thinking it would be light-hearted. But fate had other ideas. While walking to the restroom, I passed a private dining room and heard Cale's voice, low and intimate. "I'd never marry Vera if it weren't for Grandpa. She disgusts me." My heart stopped. I peeked through the crack in the door and saw him with Melina in his lap, his voice heavy with wine. "Don't worry, love. I'm only marrying her to keep you close at the school. You're the one I love." I didn't cry. Not this time. I just stared at the scene, memorized it, and smiled. So this was Cale in his 20s, arrogant, foolish, blind to the consequences of his actions. How had I ever wept for this man? As I walked away, I whispered under my breath, "Cale, you won't be needed at tomorrow's wedding." The morning of my wedding arrived like a warm breeze through winter, quiet, gentle, almost suspiciously calm. I stood in front of the mirror, wrapped in a delicate red gown trimmed with gold thread, my reflection both foreign and familiar. There was a strange tranquility in me, the kind that comes when you've walked through fire and somehow come out clean. This wasn't the wedding I'd once imagined, not to Cale, not with tears and cold glances and silent dinners to follow. No, this time I chose peace. I chose lure. The guests began arriving early. Polite, composed people in pressed suits and pastel dresses, murmuring amongst themselves when they realized I was not marrying Cale. I could hear the low hum of confusion. Isn't that the older son? What happened to the engagement? But no one dared say anything outright. The Donovan name still held power, and Lure, in his dark navy suit and solemn expression, wore that name like armor. He looked regal. Not flashy like Cale. Not dramatic. Just grounded. A man who knew his place in the world and had no need to shout it. When we walked the aisle together, hands barely touching, he leaned in and whispered softly, still not too late to back out. I turned and met his eyes, and without hesitation, replied, not a chance. Midway through the reception, as we made rounds to toast the guests, the air shifted. A door creaked. The quiet hum turned to tension. And there he was, Cale, storming in late, stinking of whiskey and last night's regrets. He wore the same crumpled shirt from the previous day, and beside him, dressed head to toe in red like she was the bride, stood Melina. I felt the nausea crawl up my throat, but I swallowed it. Just like in the past life. Back then, Cale had vanished on our wedding day, leaving me to stand alone in front of hundreds. I remembered the stares, the pity, the murmurs that cut sharper than any blade. And to make matters worse, he had shown up later, with Melina on his arm, as if flaunting his triumph. This time, I wasn't standing alone. Lure was beside me. Tall. Still. A silent storm. Cale's eyes locked onto Lure, and his expression warped into confusion and disbelief. Uncle Lure, why are you in a groom's suit? He asked, voice shaking. Lure lifted a brow and answered dryly, because I'm the groom, Cale. What did you expect me to wear, sweats? The room gasped. Cale's jaw slackened, his hands balling into fists. This was supposed to be my wedding. Mr. Donovan rose slowly from his chair, cane in hand, and slammed it down on the floor with a deafening crack. You didn't want the marriage. You made it very clear. You burned every letter I sent. I gave you your freedom. Don't come here now and act the victim. Cale looked to me next, eyes pleading, then narrowed. You planned this. You manipulated Grandpa. You tricked Lure into this. You've always been two-faced, Vera. Before I could answer, Lure stepped between us, his voice sharp and commanding. Watch your mouth. You'll refer to her as Aunt Vera from now on. Cale blinked, stunned, almost tripping backward into Melina who, of course, looked thrilled at the drama. Ethan, this is perfect, she whispered a little too loudly, clutching his arm. Now that they're married, we can too. You promised we'd be together, remember? Mr. Donovan turned toward her with a cold snort. You think anyone can just marry into this family? You're mistaken, girl. A woman who slept her way into a job and got fired for scandal won't marry into my house. Not while I'm breathing. Melina's eyes went glassy. She tried to keep smiling, but the trembling lip betrayed her. Ethan, say something, she whimpered. They're insulting me. But Cale was frozen. He looked at the guests, many of whom were whispering again. Isn't she the one who ran off and came back pregnant? She has no shame. Weren't her parents disgraced because of her? Each sentence dropped like lead weights into the room, and Melina couldn't take it. She burst into tears and ran out, her red heels echoing against the marble floor. Cale looked lost for a moment. Then chased after her like a dog after a runaway bone. I watched them go and didn't feel a thing. Not anger. Not sadness. Just a quiet detachment. Later that night, after the guests had left and the lanterns were dimmed, I sat in our new room, draped in red silks, the scent of sweet wood and jasmine floating in the air. Laura sat beside me, not touching, just watching. There was something I had to ask. Was it you? I said softly, eyes fixed on the polished floor. Did you report Melina to the school board? He was quiet for a long time. Then, without looking at me, he nodded. You married me. I won't let you be wronged again. My throat tightened. No one had ever protected me like that, not even in the smallest of ways. And here he was, silent and sturdy, willing to fight for my dignity when I wasn't even sure I deserved it. I've also spoken to the principal, he added. If you want to return to teaching, you can. The doors are open. I paused, unsure how to phrase what came next. I don't think I want to go back. I watched him carefully for any flicker of disappointment, but there was none. He only said, then don't. I want to write. Apply to a newspaper. I have an article I'm working on. If it gets published, I'll have a foot in the door. Laura smiled. A small, rare thing. Then let's make sure they see your name on every page. That night, I stayed up till dawn writing. I submitted the piece the next morning and walked past the fabric store, remembering how Cale never even wore anything but department store basics. But Laura? He only wore white, clean, pressed, serious. I decided he needed color in his wardrobe. Something warm. As I reached for a bolt of fabric, a familiar laugh floated through the shop. Cale. And Melina. Of course. She spotted me almost instantly, eyes narrowing as she tugged Cale closer. That one, she said loudly, pointing to the same fabric I held. Wrap it up for me. I smiled, calm. Give it to her, I told the clerk. Some people just can't resist taking things I've already thrown away. Melina bristled. Don't act so superior just because you tricked your way into Laura's bed. You weren't always so elegant when you were chasing after Cale like a dog. I turned to Cale then, gave him a long look from head to toe, and said with a smirk, charming, isn't he? Cale stiffened. Don't think marrying my uncle makes you special. That old marriage contract is the only reason he married you. Melina, she loves me for me. But out of the corner of my eye, I caught it, the flicker of doubt on Melina's face. And then she clung tighter to him, masking it with a sugary smile. We should thank you, Vera. Without you, Ethan and I wouldn't be together. You'll come to the baby's celebration, won't you? She added, placing a hand on her belly. I laughed. Not bitter. Not cruel. Just amused. Sure. As long as you don't mind the gift being a DNA test. Her face drained of color, but I didn't stay to watch the fallout. I had places to be. A life to live. And a husband waiting at home. Word around town spreads faster than perfume on silk, and soon enough, the whole city was buzzing with talk of Melina's pregnancy. Every auntie at the market, every teacher in the staff rooms, every idle tongue in the cafes, all speculating about the baby, the wedding, the downfall of a once proud man named Cale Donovan. And while most of the noise faded into background static for me, one rumor refused to leave my ears, that Cale had started visiting the Donovan estate again, begging to be allowed to marry Melina. It was almost pitiful. Mr. Donovan, true to form, stood firm. As long as I'm alive, that woman will never enter this house, he declared during a breakfast meeting, slamming his cup onto the table so hard the porcelain cracked. Cale pleaded, argued, threw around phrases like free love and changing times, but it was useless. When he dared to call the unborn baby a member of the Donovan bloodline, Mr. Donovan's rage became volcanic. A child conceived out of wedlock isn't an heir, he said. It's a mistake. And you're making a disgrace of our name. In the end, Cale was kicked out. He held a small, dismal wedding with Melina in the same house that was once meant for me. A house I had once helped design, down to the tiles and curtains. I didn't feel anything when I heard about it. Not sadness, not vengeance. Just silence. They had a few friends there, mostly Kale's drinking buddies. No family. No blessing. No warmth. It didn't take long for the cracks to show. Melina began complaining almost immediately. One of my old colleagues told me she had been seen screaming at Kale in the parking lot of the grocery store, something about his salary not being enough to buy proper fabric for her maternity clothes. "How can you call yourself a man?" she'd snapped, loud enough for the whole street to hear. "You gave up your inheritance for me, and now we can't even afford diapers." Kale started showing up at the Donovan estate again, like a dog hoping to be let back in. This time, he didn't even ask to come in himself, he just sent letters and messages asking Mr. Donovan to at least allow the baby into the family. Mr. Donovan's reply was as brutal as ever, *, the child can come. The woman never will, *. While Kale wallowed in regret, life moved forward for me. I received a letter from the newspaper. They loved my article. Wanted to publish it. I had been hired. A real job. A fresh start. Not one given to me by family ties or tradition, but one I earned, all on my own. I hadn't felt this kind of joy in both lives combined. One day, walking home from the newsroom, I passed a corner where some fellow teachers were gossiping, their voices thick with glee and scandal. "Did you hear?" one of them said. "Kale Donovan's wife was caught cheating." "No." "Who with?" "The principal. From the next school over. Caught them in bed, clothes off and everything." I froze. A slow, sharp chill moved down my spine. Apparently, the principal's wife, a fierce woman, all hair rollers and rage, had come home early and found Melina and her husband mid-act. She had screamed so loud the entire neighborhood came out. Dragged them both to the police station. Threw buckets of waste at Kale's house. Every disgraceful thing she could think of, she did. And the city drank it up like water in a drought. Melina lost her job. The principal was fired and publicly shamed. But the final blow? The scandal reached the Donovan family's private circle. The shame it brought, Kale couldn't bear it. He came crawling back to Mr. Donovan, falling to his knees at the front gates like a man stripped of all dignity. "Grandfather," he begged, tears cutting through the filth on his cheeks. "I was wrong. Please, forgive me. I wish I could say I felt nothing. But something in me twitched, not sympathy exactly, but a dull ache for what could have been if he hadn't ruined everything." Mr. Donovan eventually relented, letting Kale come back, but alone. Melina was still banned. She was to remain outside the gates like the exile she had become. Soon after, Kale came to see me. Alone. Older. Smaller somehow. "Vera," he said, his voice awkward, heavy. I know I did everything wrong. Melina. I didn't know I didn't know what she was capable of." I listened quietly. He stammered through some speech about how he'd finally seen the truth. How I had been the one person who was always good to him. How he now realized what he had lost. I sipped my tea. "You and Lure," he hesitated, eyes flickering, "it's not real love. There's still time for us. If you left him now, we could," I burst out laughing. Not a soft chuckle. A full, unrestrained laugh. "You're unbelievable," I said when I caught my breath. "Do you really think love is some backup plan? That I'd fall into your arms because you finally realized what you had?" He stood there stunned, embarrassed, and for the first time, I saw it, shame. True, raw shame. "I'm happy now," I said, rising from my chair. "Lure is 1,000, no, 10,000 times the man you'll ever be. And next time you see me, you'll address me properly." "Aunt Vera," I left him standing there, humiliated and small, and walked away without a shred of regret. But Lure, oh, Lure. He'd heard everything. As I turned the corner back to the estate, 2 arms wrapped around my waist, pulling me into warmth. His voice low in my ear, "We're moving out." I looked up and grinned. "What, are you jealous?" He didn't say anything, but the tips of his ears turned red. We finalized our plans to move within a week. Mr. Donovan, wise and understanding as ever, gave us his blessing. But just as we were packing, the chaos returned, as it always did, screeching and wild at the gates of the Donovan estate. It was Melina. Her belly now large, dress stretched taut and clinging in all the wrong places. Her mascara ran like bruises down her face as she screamed at the top of her lungs, "Kale! You're responsible for this child. You can't abandon us. I'll report you for harassment if you don't come out." She was drawing attention. A crowd was gathering. The guards tried to keep her out, but she threatened to throw herself down the steps. Just then, Kale finally appeared, his face pale and drawn. "You dare show your face?" he growled. "After everything?" "Oh, spare me," Melina snapped. "If you weren't a Donovan, I wouldn't have even looked at you. You're nothing without that name." His mouth opened, but no words came. It was pathetic, watching two people tear each other apart with nothing left to steal. But before I could walk away, Melina spotted me. She staggered toward me like a wounded animal, eyes burning with rage. She grabbed my arm, hard. "You did this," she hissed. "You turned them all against me." "Let go," I snapped, yanking back, but she held tighter. "You think you're so much better than me? At the end of the day, we're both women relying on men to climb up in the world. Don't think your crown won't slip." Then she shoved me hard. I didn't have time to react. My foot caught on the edge of the stone path, and the next thing I knew, the world tilted, cracked, then turned black. I woke up in a world wrapped in sterile white and silence. The first thing I noticed was the ceiling, plain, speckled with tiny cracks like fractured glass. Then the muted beep of a heart monitor. Then the faint pressure on my hand. When I turned my head, slowly, painfully, I saw Lure. Slouched forward in the chair beside me, his hands gripping mine like a lifeline. His chin was covered in stubble, his eyes shadowed by days of lost sleep, and he looked wrecked. The composed man I married, always so poised and unreadable, was now entirely undone. "You're awake," he said, voice barely above a whisper, as if even sound could hurt me. "Vera, thank God." I thought. He choked slightly, pulling himself together before the tears could fall. "I should have been there. I should have protected you. I swear, I'll never let anyone touch you again." I blinked slowly, taking in his face. His eyes. His voice. I wanted to smile, to reassure him, but my head was throbbing, a deep, pounding ache blooming just behind my skull. I lifted my hand to touch it and winced. There was a bandage there. Clean and firm. "You hit your head," he said quickly, standing to adjust my pillow. "Mild concussion. Some swelling. But the doctors said you'll be okay. You just need rest." I fell. My voice cracked. It didn't even sound like mine. "No," he replied, eyes hardening. "You were pushed by her." It all rushed back in like a flood. Melina. Her shrill voice. Her nails digging into my arm. The shove. The stone. The pain. The sudden dark. "She's lucky I didn't kill her with my own hands," he muttered, more to himself than to me. If the guards hadn't held me back, I squeezed his hand gently. "It's okay. I'm okay now." But I wasn't. Not really. Because as much as my body had survived, something else inside me had cracked open, an old scar ripped anew. In my previous life, I had been broken by Kale and Melina in quiet ways. Lies, betrayal, humiliation. But never had it turned this violent, this cruel, this dangerous. The thought of carrying that kind of hatred, it chilled me. The doctor came in soon after and told me I could go home in a few days. Rest. Avoid stress. No sudden movements. The usual advice. But as I stared at the ceiling that night, unable to sleep, I couldn't help but wonder how far Melina would go. And why, after all she had done, after all she had won, she still felt the need to destroy me. 2 nights later, I was discharged. Lure had arranged everything, transport, food, even new pillows in our guest bedroom so I could rest easier. He never left my side. He didn't ask for permission to help. He just did. Quietly. Competently. Lovingly. And on our first night back, while I lay in bed and he gently tucked the blanket around me like I was something precious, I caught him staring. "What is it?" I asked, my voice soft. He hesitated for a long moment. Then, without breaking eye contact, he said, "You need to be more careful now." "I will," I promised. "I wasn't expecting, that's not what I meant." I frowned. "Then what?" He moved to kneel beside the bed, took my hand, and placed it against his chest. I could feel his heart, steady and warm. His other hand reached into the nightstand and pulled out a small envelope, white, marked with the hospital's logo. "I didn't know how to tell you," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "But they ran routine checks while you were unconscious. Scans. Tests. Blood work. Vera, you're pregnant." I blinked. The words didn't register at first. I blinked again. Pregnant. A baby. A life. Inside me, tears welled in my eyes, not from fear or confusion, but from something I had never felt before in either life, pure, unfiltered joy. My hands trembled. "Are you sure?" I asked. Lure nodded. "I saw the report myself. The doctor said everything looks healthy. But we'll have to be careful. No stress. No strain. I'm going to be a mother." I whispered, almost afraid to say it too loudly. "You're going to be the best mother," he said, kissing my hand with reverence. "And I promise, I'll be the kind of father you never had. The kind he never was." We held each other for a long time that night, our breaths synced, our hearts beating like one. This wasn't just a new chapter, it was an entirely different story. A future we were writing with every whispered vow, every glance, every unspoken promise. But of course, peace never lasted long in our world. 2 days later, Lure was called away for a business trip, just overnight. Mr. Donovan had a matter in the city only he could handle, and though he didn't want to leave me alone, I insisted. "I'm fine now. The locks are changed. The guards are alert. I promise." He kissed me on the forehead before he left, his gaze lingering longer than usual. "If anything happens, anything, call me." I nodded, pressing my palm to his cheek. "Go. I'll be right here." That evening, just after sunset, there was a knock at the door. I thought it might be one of the housekeepers or a neighbor with a delivery. But when I opened it slightly, I froze. Cale. He stood there in the doorway, hands shoved into his pockets, hair a mess, eyes sunken with exhaustion. I didn't say anything. Just stared. He spoke first. "I heard what happened," he said quietly. "I didn't know she'd go that far." "I didn't. I didn't mean for you to get hurt." "Then why are you here?" I asked, my voice flat. He looked down, shuffled his feet. "To ask for your help." I laughed. I couldn't help it. "You think I'm going to help her? After she tried to kill me?" "She's carrying my child," he said, eyes flicking to mine. "I know she messed up. But please, Vera." Grandpa's cut her off completely. "She has nothing. And I don't know how to fix this." I stared at him for a long moment, watching the desperation build in his face. Then, slowly, I walked to the sideboard, picked up a small white envelope, and handed it to him. "What's this?" he asked. "Advice," I said calmly. "As your aunt." He opened it. Inside was a pamphlet from a private DNA testing clinic. His eyes widened as he looked up. "What are you saying?" I tilted my head, voice quiet but cutting. Get a test. Or better yet, go to the doctor. Have your fertility checked. You might be surprised. It took him a moment, but then it hit. The realization. In our previous life, Cale and I had been married for years. We had tried for a child. Nothing ever happened. I had assumed it was me, always me. But now? Now I knew better. Cale stumbled back as if the floor had shifted beneath him. That's not possible, he muttered, shaking his head. Melina's pregnant. I saw the tests. And yet, I said softly, you never got me pregnant. Not once. Not in all those years. Strange, isn't it? I didn't wait for him to respond. I closed the door gently in his face. Later that week, I saw the news before anyone else did. 2 bodies found in a fire. Cale Donovan and Melina Hart. Police report said he started it. That after a violent argument, he poured alcohol over the rug and lit a match. Neighbors claimed they'd heard screaming, glass shattering, Melina shouting something about lies and infertility before the fire started. By the time anyone arrived, they were already gone. Cale, the boy I once thought I'd love forever, had gone up in flames, both metaphorically and, now, literally. Mr. Donovan took the news like stone crumbling. He aged 10 years overnight. We offered to bring him home with us, to care for him, to surround him with warmth, but he refused. I've buried a son before, he said, his voice hollow. Now a grandson. That's enough. Just visit me when you can. I cried that night. Not for Cale. But for the man he could have been. For the path he never chose. For the girl I used to be, the one who would have burned for his love. She was gone now. And someone better had taken her place. Time moved differently after Cale's death. Days felt longer, like every hour was wrapped in cotton, muffled and weightless. The world, once so tangled in chaos and betrayal, suddenly felt quieter. Lure held me closer those days, watched me a little more carefully, like I might still shatter from the memories that clung to me like smoke. But I didn't. I wasn't fragile anymore. I was grieving, yes, but not for Cale. I grieved for the past, for the girl who had once lit candles for a man who would never come home. But now, with Lure's hand in mine, and the soft rhythmic flutter of our child growing inside me, the past felt like another lifetime, like a fading dream I no longer had to wake from. The city, of course, moved on. As it always does. Cale and Melina's story burned through the gossip circuits like wildfire, then extinguished in a blink. New scandals took their place. But even so, their names still floated occasionally through market whispers and faculty lounge murmurs. Such a waste, some would say. He had everything, others sighed. What none of them understood was that Cale had nothing, not really. He never had love. He didn't know how to hold it, nurture it, or recognize it even when it wept in front of him. He only knew obsession and pride, and those things don't last. They rot from the inside out. But I had everything now. The baby kicked for the first time one rainy morning while I was riding by the window, my fingers brushing against the rounded curve of my belly. I froze, breath caught, and laughed out loud before shouting for Lure. He came running in like something had caught fire, and I took his hand and placed it gently over the spot where I'd felt it. We stood there in silence for nearly a minute, waiting. When it happened again, a tiny nudge, like a secret being told from the inside, his eyes lit up in a way I'd never seen before. It was as if the entire world had distilled into that one moment, and we were both just passengers in awe of it. This is real, he whispered, voice thick with wonder. We're really going to be parents. Scared? I teased, though tears pricked my eyes too. Terrified, he replied with a soft chuckle. But more than that. I feel lucky. So damn lucky that somehow, in all the wreckage of what your life used to be, you found me. No, I corrected, taking his face in my hands. We found each other. And we saved each other. Life settled into a gentle rhythm after that. I officially started work at the paper, writing a weekly column that unexpectedly gained traction. From the Hearth, it was called, personal reflections and anonymous letters sent in by women, mostly, about heartbreak, motherhood, silence, and survival. People wrote in droves. Some left flowers at the office. One woman sent me a handwritten note that simply said, you said what I never dared to say out loud. Thank you, that message sat taped above my writing desk for months. Every time I doubted myself, I looked at it and remembered why I had fought so hard to stand on my own. Lure's support never wavered. He'd pick me up from the office if it rained. Pack lunch when I forgot. Rub my back when the pregnancy aches started getting worse. Sometimes I'd catch him talking to my belly when he thought I was asleep, whispering things like, "Don't worry, little one. I'll be better than the men who came before me." And then, just when I thought peace had finally taken root, fate decided to give one last reminder that some ghosts never sleep. It started with a simple knock at the door. Not loud. Not urgent. I was home alone, curled up on the sofa with a blanket over my legs, our baby already learning the rhythm of my daily naps. I assumed it was the delivery boy or a neighbor. But when I opened the door, it wasn't either. It was her. Melina's mother. I hadn't seen her in over a decade, not even in my past life. But I knew her face from old photos, from the gossip columns, from the wide-eyed way Melina used to say, "My mother was the only woman who ever loved me." She looked broken. Her shoulders were hunched. Her hair, once sleek and styled, was now streaked with gray and messily tied back. Her eyes, though, were sharp. Like a hawk who had lived too long in a cage. "I don't mean to intrude," she said slowly. "But you're Vera, right?" I nodded, cautious, my hand resting instinctively on my stomach. "I won't stay long," she added quickly. I needed to see the woman who survived my daughter. I didn't know what to say to that. So I simply stepped aside and let her in. She sat at the edge of the couch like she didn't belong in any space anymore. Her hands twisted around one another, and she stared at the floor when she spoke. "She wasn't always like that," she began. "Melina. She was bright once. Sensitive. She used to cry when animals got hurt in movies. But something shifted after her father left. She changed. Hardened." I remained silent. There was nothing I could say to redeem Melina in my mind, but I respected this woman's grief. I could see it in her shoulders, the kind of grief that carves out hollow places inside you. "I wanted her to have a better life," she continued. "I spoiled her. Enabled her. I thought if I gave her everything, she'd never feel abandoned again. But I was wrong." She looked at me then, and her gaze was fierce. "She envied you," she said. "Even back when you and Cale were still children. She told me once that you didn't have to try hard to be loved. That people just gave it to you." I didn't understand what she meant back then. I do now. I swallowed, unsure how to respond. "I never wanted her to hate me," I whispered, almost to myself. "She hated the idea of not being you," she corrected. "That's what destroyed her." She stood then, slowly, as if the conversation had taken the last of her strength. "I won't bother you again. I just needed to tell you. I'm sorry. For everything." And with that, she was gone. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because of fear or sorrow, but because I couldn't stop thinking about how twisted love can become when it's born from desperation. How women are taught from a young age to tie their worth to men, to marriage, to the illusion of being chosen. Melina had never really loved Cale. She had only loved winning. And Cale had only ever wanted what he couldn't have. In the end, they burned each other to ash. But Lure and I, we had built something from the same ashes. And for once in both lives, I finally felt free. Sometimes I still wake up in the quiet just before dawn and forget what year it is. For a few seconds, I blink up at the ceiling and expect to hear Kale's cold voice, to see that familiar ache of loneliness sitting beside me like an unwanted companion. But then I feel the warmth pressed against my side, hear the soft, even breathing of the man who never once turned his back on me, and I remember, I'm not her anymore. That girl died with the version of me that let others define her worth. The woman I've become is something else entirely. Someone new. Someone free. Our daughter, Isla, is 5 now. She has Laura's calm eyes and my stubborn mouth. Her hair is always a tangled mess, her shoes are always muddy, and she laughs like the sun lives in her throat. She's the kind of child who asks questions no adult can answer, like, why do birds stay even when it's cold? Or, do stars get lonely? Sometimes, when she plays by herself on the living room rug, humming little tunes only she knows, I just watch her. And my chest fills with something I can't quite describe, something that feels like healing and wonder and gratitude all braided into one. One afternoon, she climbed into my lap, her knees covered in chalk dust from the driveway, and asked, Mama, can you tell me a story? A real one. Not the princess kind. I smiled. A real story, Okay. So I began. Slowly. Carefully. I told her about a girl who used to think love meant waiting. Who believed that silence was loyalty and that tears were proof of how deeply she could feel. A girl who clung to someone who never saw her for who she was, only for who she made him feel like, powerful, wanted, adored. I told her how that girl got hurt. A lot. And how for a long time, she thought that pain was what love looked like. But then what happened? Isla asked, eyes wide, leaning in closer. Well, I said, brushing her wild hair back from her forehead, one day, she woke up. Not just from sleep, but from everything. And she realized she didn't want to be loved by someone who only loved himself. She wanted to be chosen, not as a second option, not as a duty, but because she was seen. Really seen. And did she find him? She whispered. I looked across the room. Laura was standing by the kitchen doorway, apron still tied around his waist, holding a tray of sweet and sour fish, my favorite. He caught my eye and smiled, the kind that starts slow and reaches all the way to his eyes. It was the same smile that made my heart slow down when the world spun too fast. The same smile he wore the day he stood beside me at our wedding, when Kale stormed in and realized, too late, that I had already walked away from his shadow. Yes, I told her softly. She did. She found someone who didn't just love her, but respected her. Someone who held her hand through storms instead of being the one who caused them. Did they live happily ever after? Isla asked, the way only a 5-year-old can, believing in ever-afters like they're written in the stars. I paused, thought about all we had been through.